I arrived in Brunswick on a Thursday afternoon in late October, when the fog rolled in off the Atlantic like a living thing, thick and gray and persistent. The town appeared through my windshield in pieces, a weathered church steeple, the skeletal masts of fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, storefronts with hand-painted signs that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 70s. It was exactly what I'd been searching for when I'd scrolled through apartment listings at 3 a.m, unable to sleep in my old life, isolation wrapped in the guise of quaint coastal charm. Willow Court stood alone on a cliffside at the eastern edge of town, accessible only by a narrow, winding road that branched off from Main Street. The building was a 3-story Victorian structure painted a pale, almost sickly blue, with white trim that had started to peel in places. Gabled windows stared out at the churning sea below, and a wrought iron fence enclosed a small, overgrown courtyard where dead leaves had accumulated in drifts against the foundation. There was something off about the quiet surrounding it, not peaceful, but heavy, as if the air itself had been weighed down by too many unspoken words. I pulled my Honda into one of the 3 parking spaces behind the building and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. It had been a 6-hour drive from Boston, and I'd spent most of it second-guessing my decision to leave everything behind for a place I'd only seen in photographs. But when I looked at the building again, I felt something that might have been relief. It was mine now, at least for the next 6 months. Apartment 3A, a fresh start. The lobby smelled like old wood polish and something floral that had gone slightly sour. Dark hardwood floors creaked under my feet as I approached the front desk, where a small brass bell sat next to a sign that read, "Ring for assistance." I pressed it once, and the sound echoed through the space, too loud in the stillness. While I waited, I took in my surroundings. The faded wallpaper patterned with climbing vines, the ornate brass fixtures that lined the walls, the potted plants in the corners that looked perpetually wilted despite the moisture in the air. One of them, a drooping fern in a ceramic pot, had brown edges on every frond, as if it were slowly dying from the inside out. "Miss Brenner." I jumped, turning to find an elderly man standing in the doorway to what I assumed was a maintenance closet. He was tall and thin, dressed in a custodian's gray uniform that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was white and carefully combed, his face lined with deep wrinkles that made his age impossible to guess. 70? 80? His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "I'm Mr. Keene," he said, his voice soft and measured. "The night caretaker. I've been expecting you." He moved forward with a slow, careful gait, producing a key from his pocket. It was an old-fashioned brass key attached to a wooden fob engraved with 3A. "Thank you," I said, taking it from him. His fingers were cold when they brushed against mine, the kind of cold that seemed to go deeper than just skin temperature. "The landlord mentioned someone would be here to help me get settled." "Of course." He gestured toward the narrow staircase at the far end of the lobby. "3rd floor. I'll help you with your boxes." "That's really not necessary." "I insist." There was something in the way he said it that discouraged further protest. Not threatening, exactly, but final. We made 3 trips from my car to the apartment, Mr. Keene moving with surprising efficiency despite his age. He didn't speak beyond the occasional direction. "Mind the step there," or "that loose board in the hallway," and I found myself filling the silence with nervous chatter about the drive, the weather, how charming the town looked despite the fog. He nodded politely, but offered nothing in return, his expression never changing from that same neutral, watchful calm. The apartment itself was smaller than the photos had suggested, but cleaner. The main room served as both living area and kitchenette, with a Murphy bed folded into the wall and a small table pushed against the window. The hardwood floors continued from the lobby, worn smooth in the center from decades of foot traffic. A bathroom the size of a closet opened off the main room, and that was it. Everything was furnished in a generic, transient way. Beige walls, white curtains, a brown couch that sagged in the middle. It smelled faintly of bleach and something else I couldn't quite place. Lavender, maybe, or some kind of cleaning product that was meant to smell like lavender but didn't quite succeed. As Mr. Keene set down the last box near the window, I heard a door open and close quickly in the hallway. Through my half-open door, I glimpsed a woman in her 40s with short, dark hair darting into apartment 3B. She moved with a quick, bird-like energy, her eyes darting toward me for just a fraction of a second before she disappeared inside. I heard the distinct sound of multiple locks clicking into place. 1, 2, 3 separate locks, each one engaging with a sharp, metallic snap. "That's Ms. Shore," Mr. Keene said, following my gaze. "She's been here quite some time. Keeps to herself, mostly." He paused at my door, one hand resting on the frame. His fingers were long and thin, the knuckles prominent. "We all do, here at Willow Court. It's best that way, Miss Brenner. Best for everyone." There was something in his tone, not a threat, but a warning dressed up as friendly advice. His pale eyes held mine for just a moment longer than was comfortable. Before I could respond or ask what he meant, he nodded once and disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps barely audible on the old floorboards. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, trying to shake the strange unease that had settled over me since arriving. I told myself it was just the adjustment period, the natural anxiety that came with uprooting your entire life and moving to a place where you didn't know a single soul. I hung my few clothes in the narrow closet, arranged my laptop and design supplies on the table by the window, stacked my books on the floor next to where the Murphy bed would fold down. The apartment remained stubbornly impersonal, as if it refused to accept my presence no matter how many of my belongings I scattered around. The walls were thin. I could hear the building settling around me, the groan of pipes, the creak of floorboards overhead, the distant sound of water running somewhere below, but no voices, no footsteps, no music or television, just the architecture speaking to itself in its old, tired language. By the time the sun began to set, the fog had grown so thick I could barely see the ocean from my window. The light took on a strange, diffuse quality, making it difficult to tell where the sky ended and the water began. Everything was gray and formless, pressing up against the glass like something trying to get in. I made myself a simple dinner of canned soup heated on the 2-burner stove, eating it while standing at the window and watching the fog swirl past. The silence in the building was absolute, so complete it felt almost hostile. At 9:30, I decided to call it a night. The drive had exhausted me more than I'd realized, and the idea of crawling into an actual bed, even an unfamiliar one, was appealing. I pulled the Murphy bed down from the wall, grimacing at the metallic screech of its hinges, and made it up with the sheets I had brought from my old apartment. At least those smelled like home, like the fabric softener I always used. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. I was brushing my teeth in the cramped bathroom, staring at my own tired reflection in the mirror above the sink, when I noticed it. A white rectangle visible through the bathroom doorway, stark against the dark wood of my apartment door. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, listening. The building was silent. I spat into the sink and padded back into the main room, my heart beating faster than it should have been. The envelope was taped to my door at eye level, sealed with what looked like an old-fashioned wax seal. My name was written on the front in precise, almost mechanical cursive. Miss Eliza Brenner, apartment 3A. I pulled open my door and looked out into the hallway, but it was empty. The overhead light flickered once, casting jumping shadows along the walls, then steadied. No one. Nothing. Back inside, I locked the door, one lock, then the deadbolt, then the chain, and peeled the envelope off carefully. The tape left a small residue on the wood. Inside was a single sheet of white paper, heavy and expensive feeling, the kind of paper that suggested formality and importance. The same cursive handwriting filled the page, each letter perfectly formed. Welcome to Willow Court. For your safety and comfort, please observe the following guidelines. 1. You must cross the threshold of your apartment before 10:13 p.m. Do not be late. 2. A full cup of tap water must be placed against your door frame each night before you sleep. 3. The window blinds are to remain completely closed between the hours of 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. Do not open them for any reason. 4. Any instruction delivered on red paper is to be followed immediately and precisely. 5. You may not invite a guest across your threshold until you have verified their reflection in the main hallway mirror. These rules exist for your protection. Adherence is mandatory. Management. I read the letter 3 times, my exhaustion giving way to a kind of numb bewilderment. Was this someone's idea of a joke? An eccentric landlord with too much time on their hands? The specificity of the rules was unsettling. Why 10:13 p.m. and not 10:00? Why a cup of water against the doorframe? The whole thing had the feel of some elaborate prank, but the expensive paper and formal tone suggested someone had gone to considerable effort. I looked at the second rule about the cup of water and felt my exhaustion deepen. I was so tired my bones ached, and the idea of performing some arbitrary ritual for the amusement of whoever had written this absurd letter made me want to laugh. Or cry. I wasn't sure which. Instead, I set the letter on the table and climbed into bed, chalking the whole thing up to small-town eccentricity. Tomorrow, in the daylight, I'd ask Mr. Keene about it. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd just ignore it entirely. The apartment was cold. Not uncomfortably so at first, just noticeably cooler than it had been earlier in the evening. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. My body was begging for rest after the long drive and the stress of moving, of leaving everything behind. The temperature continued to drop. Within an hour, I was shivering despite being fully clothed and wrapped in both the blanket and my winter coat that I had pulled from one of the unpacked boxes. My breath came out in visible puffs of mist, as if I were sleeping outside rather than in a closed apartment. I got up to check the radiator in the corner, but it was warm to the touch, hissing softly with heat that seemed to dissipate into nothing the moment it left the metal. The cold was coming from somewhere else, everywhere else. The walls themselves seemed to radiate it, and the air felt thick and heavy in my lungs. I finally fell into a fitful sleep around 2 a.m, too exhausted to stay awake any longer despite the cold. My dreams were vivid and disjointed. I was in the apartment, but it kept shifting and changing around me. The walls breathed in and out like living tissue. The window showed not the ocean, but an endless gray void that seemed to pulse with its own terrible awareness. And there was something sitting on my chest, pressing down with an impossible weight, making it hard to draw breath. I couldn't see what it was, but I could feel its presence, cold and patient and hungry, as if it were waiting for something, waiting for me to understand. I woke with a gasp, just as dawn light began to filter through the window, thin and watery through the persistent fog. The weight vanished instantly, as did the cold. The apartment was warm again, almost stuffy in the morning humidity. I lay there for a long moment, heart hammering against my ribs, trying to convince myself it had just been a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and stress and sleeping in a strange place. Bad dreams in a new apartment. Old buildings got cold at night. The radiator probably cycled on and off. Everything had a rational explanation. I got up and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the gray morning. The fog was still there, as thick as ever, and I couldn't see more than 20 feet into it. Behind me, on the table, the letter sat exactly where I'd left it, those 5 rules written in perfect cursive. A coincidence, I told myself. Just coincidence and exhaustion and an overactive imagination, nothing more. But even as I thought it, I knew I was trying too hard to believe it. The days that followed my first night at Willow Court passed in a strange, suspended state. I told myself I was settling in, establishing a routine, but the truth was, I was avoiding thinking too deeply about what had happened. The cold, the nightmare, the letter with its bizarre rules. I threw myself into work, accepting freelance projects from my laptop at the small table by the window, watching the fog roll in and out with the tides. The building remained eerily quiet around me, as if I were the only person living there, though I occasionally heard the soft footfalls of Mr. Keene in the hallways after dark, tending to his mysterious duties. I saw Nadia Shore only once more during that first week, a brief glimpse of her darting from the stairwell to her apartment with a bag of groceries clutched to her chest. She moved like prey, her eyes scanning the hallway before she fumbled with her keys. When she noticed me standing in my doorway, she froze for just a moment, then offered that same tight, fearful smile before disappearing inside. The sound of her locks engaging echoed down the empty hallway. I obeyed the rules. I'm not sure when I made that decision consciously, but I did. Each night before bed, I filled a cup with tap water and placed it carefully against my doorframe. I made sure to be home well before 10 in the evening. I kept my blinds closed during the forbidden hours. It felt absurd, like participating in some elaborate theatrical performance for an audience of one, but the memory of that first night's cold kept me compliant. Better to humor whatever strange ritual this was than risk another sleepless night shivering in inexplicable freezing temperatures. On Friday evening, 8 days after my arrival, I needed to escape the apartment. The walls had been closing in on me all day, the silence too heavy, the fog pressing against my window like something alive. I hadn't left the building in 3 days, hadn't spoken to another person except in brief emails with clients. The isolation was getting to me. There was a small coffee shop on Main Street called the Harbor Grind that stayed open until 10. I'd passed it during my initial drive through town but hadn't been inside yet. At 7:30, I grabbed my laptop and headed out, telling myself I'd work there for an hour or two, be around other people, hear normal conversation and the hiss of an espresso machine. Remember what the world outside Willow Court felt like. The coffee shop was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the dim, oppressive atmosphere of my apartment. A handful of locals sat scattered at small tables, and soft indie music played from overhead speakers. I ordered a latte and settled into a corner table, opening my laptop with the intention of finishing a logo design for a small brewery in Portland. But then my phone rang. Sarah. I hesitated, remembering our last aborted conversation, but answered anyway. Maybe talking to her would help. Maybe it would make me feel less alone. Eliza. You actually picked up. I was worried after last time. I'm sorry about that, it was late. It's fine. Listen, I've been thinking about you. Are you really okay up there? You don't sound like yourself. And just like that, I found myself telling her things I hadn't planned to say, not about the rules or the supernatural cold, but about the loneliness, the strangeness of Brunswick, the feeling that I'd made a mistake leaving Boston. Sarah listened, asked gentle questions, shared stories about mutual friends to make me feel connected to something familiar. The conversation meandered and expanded, comfortable and necessary. I barely noticed the coffee shop emptying around me. The barista started cleaning the espresso machine. A couple near the window paid their bill and left. Sarah was telling me about a gallery opening she'd been to, describing the art with such enthusiasm that I could almost see it. You should come visit, she said, just for a weekend. Get out of that creepy building for a bit. Maybe, I said, smiling despite myself. That might be good. I'm serious, Liza. You sound like you need a break from... The barista appeared at my table, startling me. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but we're closing up. I glanced around. The shop was empty except for us. The lights over the counter had been dimmed. How long had I been sitting here? What time is it? I asked, a cold feeling beginning in my stomach. 10:15, the barista said apologetically. We closed at 10, but you seemed really into your call, so I let you finish up. 10:15. Sarah, I have to go. Again? Eliza, I'll call you tomorrow. I promise. I have to go right now. I hung up before she could respond, shoving my laptop into my bag with shaking hands. 10:15. The rule said 10:13. I was already late, 2 minutes late, but the rules had been so specific about that time. Not 10 o'clock, not 10:15, but 10:13. Hey, you okay? The barista asked as I stood abruptly. I'm fine. Thank you. Sorry for staying so late. I rushed out into the night, into the fog that had grown so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The street was empty. The shops dark. My car was parked near Willow Court, and I half ran down Main Street, my laptop bag bouncing against my hip. The fog muffled all sound, making my footsteps seem impossibly loud. A wave of irrational dread hit me as I ran. It wasn't just anxiety about being late or breaking some arbitrary rule. It was deeper than that, more primal, the feeling a rabbit gets when it realizes the hawk's shadow is falling across it. Something was wrong. Something was waiting. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and drove the winding road up to Willow Court faster than was safe. The building appeared through the fog like a pale ghost, its windows dark except for a faint light in the lobby. I parked haphazardly and ran to the main entrance. 10:23 p.m. My phone screen lit up my face in the darkness. 10 minutes late. I put my hand on the door handle and hesitated. The building looked the same as always. Pale blue paint, white trim, the wrought iron fence disappearing into fog. But there was something about it now, something watchful and aware, that made every instinct scream at me not to go inside. I went inside anyway. Where else could I go? The lobby was empty, the overhead lights dimmer than usual. My footsteps on the hardwood floor sounded too loud, echoing off the high ceiling. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs quickly, my breath coming faster than the exertion warranted, and when I reached the 3rd floor, I saw it immediately. Taped to my door at eye level was a stark red envelope. My hands trembled as I unlocked my door and stepped inside, peeling the envelope off as I entered. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, neat, empty, the Murphy bed still folded into the wall. But the air felt different, charged somehow, as if a storm were building inside these 4 walls. I tore open the envelope. The paper inside was blood red, the cursive writing smaller and more severe than the white letter had been. You were late. Write an apology, slip it under the mat. Do not go to bed until you have done this. I read it 3 times, my fear slowly morphing into anger. Who was watching me closely enough to know I'd been late? How did they know? There were no cameras I could see, no way for anyone to have observed my arrival time. Unless someone had been standing in the fog, watching the entrance. Unless Mr. Keene had been waiting in the lobby and left before I entered. Unless this whole building was part of some elaborate, invasive surveillance system. The anger felt better than the fear, so I fed it. I crumpled the red paper in my fist and threw it toward the small trash can near the kitchenette. It missed, landing on the floor. Fine. Let whoever was behind this come collect it themselves. I wasn't writing an apology for being 10 minutes late to my own apartment. I wasn't a child being scolded for missing curfew. This was my home, and I could come and go as I pleased. The whole situation was insane, and I was done enabling it. I got ready for bed with aggressive movements, each action a small rebellion. I didn't place the cup of water by the door. I yanked the Murphy bed down so hard the hinges screamed. I turned off all the lights except the small lamp near the bed and climbed under the covers fully clothed, my jaw clenched in defiance. Sleep didn't come. My anger slowly cooled into unease as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the silence. The building was so quiet, too quiet. No pipes groaning, no wind against the windows, no distant sound of the ocean. Just absolute oppressive silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. The thumping started at 11:47 p.m. I jolted upright at the first impact. Something heavy was being thrown against my door. Not a knock, not someone trying to get in, but a violent rhythmic assault. Thump, thump, thump. The entire door shuddered in its frame with each hit, the wood flexing inward. Between each impact, I heard the doorknob rattling, jigging madly, as if invisible hands were twisting it back and forth. The deadbolt held, the chain stayed in place, but the doorknob spun and jerked with frantic energy. "Stop," I whispered, but my voice was swallowed by the silence between thumps. The assault continued. Thump, thump, thump. Faster now, more urgent. I could see the door bowing inward with each impact, see the hinges straining. Something was trying to break through, something large and heavy and relentless. Then I noticed the shadows. They were pooling at the edges of the room, in the corners where the lamplight couldn't reach, growing darker and more solid than any natural shadow. They moved independently of any light source, creeping along the baseboards with a liquid, purposeful motion, and they were moving toward me. I scrambled out of bed, pressing my back against the wall furthest from both the door and the advancing shadows. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. The thumping grew louder, more violent. The shadows were close now, near enough that I could feel the cold radiating from them, the same unnatural cold from my first night, but concentrated, malevolent. The shadows had substance, they had intent, and as they crept closer, I could see something forming within them, shapes that might have been hands or claws or something else entirely, something reaching for me. "Okay," I screamed. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll write the apology." The thumping stopped. The sudden silence was so complete, so profound, that my ears rang with it. The shadows retreated instantly, flowing back to the corners and dissipating like smoke. The doorknob stopped rattling. The door settled back into its frame with a soft creak. I stood frozen against the wall, shaking so violently my teeth chattered. Tears streamed down my face. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. With numb, clumsy fingers, I found a piece of paper and a pen on the small table. My handwriting was barely legible, my hands shaking too badly to form proper letters. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I wrote it over and over, filling the page with apologies, not even sure what I was apologizing for anymore. Being late? Not believing? Existing in this place? I crept to the door on unsteady legs, unlocked it slowly, expecting at any moment for something to burst through, but nothing happened. I opened it just wide enough to slip the paper underneath the doormat in the hallway, then slammed it shut again, engaging all 3 locks with shaking hands. The silence continued. No more thumping, no shadows, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the Murphy bed with my back against the wall and every light on, watching the door, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. The apartment remained still and quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the persistent fog. Only then did I dare approach the door again. I opened it carefully, looking down at the doormat. The paper was gone. The red envelope was gone. But there, in the wood of the doorframe, were 4 parallel scratches, deep gouges that ran from top to bottom, as if something with claws had tried to tear its way through the door. I touched one of the scratches with a trembling finger. The wood was splintered and rough, the gouges at least a 1/4 inch deep. This wasn't paint damage or wear. Something had carved these marks into solid wood with terrible force. This had happened. All of it had happened. The thumping, the shadows, the feeling of something trying to break through. It was real. It was all impossibly, horrifyingly real. My skepticism, my attempts at rationalization, my conviction that there had to be a logical explanation, all of it crumbled in the face of those 4 scratches. Whatever governed Willow Court, whatever enforced these rules, it wasn't a person playing pranks. It wasn't an elaborate trick or a surveillance system. It was something else entirely, something that could manifest physical force, command shadows, and leave permanent scars on the world. I was no longer a skeptic. I was a believer, and I was terrified. The week following the red letter incident, I existed in a state of hyper-vigilant compliance. Every rule was followed with fanatical precision. The cup of water appeared at my doorframe each night at exactly 9 p.m. I was inside my apartment by 9:30, giving myself a comfortable margin before the 10:13 deadline. The blinds remained sealed shut during the forbidden hours, and I avoided even looking in their direction between midnight and 3 a.m., but compliance brought no peace. If anything, my anxiety deepened. The apartment felt smaller each day, the walls pressing in with a suffocating weight. I barely slept, jolting awake at every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against the windows. The scratches on my doorframe remained, 4 parallel gouges that I traced with my fingers each morning, reminding myself that what I'd experienced was real. I stopped going out. Groceries could be delivered. Work could be done remotely. The outside world felt dangerous now, not because of what was out there, but because leaving meant having to come back. Having to cross that threshold before the arbitrary deadline. Having to return to this place that watched and waited and punished. By the 10th day, I was unraveling. The isolation was eating at me from the inside. I'd always been someone who needed solitude to recharge, but this was different. This was imprisonment dressed up as safety. The silence in Willow Court was absolute. No sounds of other tenants, no voices, no evidence that anyone else even lived in this building except for the occasional glimpse of Nadia darting into her apartment or Mr. Keen's soft footfalls in the night. I needed to understand. That's what I told myself as I sat at my table on a Tuesday night, staring at the window blinds. The pragmatic part of my brain that had served me so well in my old life, the part that solved design problems and managed client expectations, was demanding answers. What exactly happened if I broke a rule? Was it always the same consequence, or did the punishment fit the transgression? Was there a pattern I could identify, a logic I could exploit? The blinds rule was the most specific and the most mysterious. Completely closed between midnight and 3 a.m. Don't open them for any reason. What was outside during those hours? What would I see? At 12:47 a.m., I made my decision. I turned off all the lights in the apartment except for a small lamp near the bathroom, leaving most of the room in shadow. Then I approached the window slowly, my heart already racing. The blinds were cheap plastic slats, yellowed with age, and they rattled slightly as I reached for the cord. I hesitated, my hand hovering. This was insane. I knew what happened when rules were broken, but the not knowing felt worse than any punishment. I needed to see. I needed to understand what I was trapped with. I pulled the cord just enough to crack the blinds open an inch. A freezing wind immediately whipped through the gap, so cold it burned my skin. It wasn't natural wind. It carried no scent of salt or sea, just a bone-deep cold that felt older than the building itself. The temperature in the apartment plummeted in seconds, my breath misting in the air. And then I saw it. Pressed against the glass, inches from my face, was a pale, gaunt face. The skin was the color of spoiled milk, stretched too tight over prominent bones. But it was the eyes, or the lack of them, that made my blood freeze. Where eyes should have been were hollow, dark sockets, impossibly deep, as if they went back forever into some terrible void. The mouth hung slightly open, revealing darkness inside. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It just stared at me with those empty sockets, and I felt seen in a way that made my skin crawl, not just observed but known, understood, catalogued. I slammed the blinds shut with a strangled cry, stumbling backward until I hit the opposite wall. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the cord to ensure the blinds were completely closed. The wind stopped immediately, but the cold lingered for several minutes, seeping into my bones. That face, that terrible, hollow face, it had been waiting out there. How many nights had it been there, pressing against the glass while I slept, separated from me by only these cheap plastic blinds? I spent the rest of the night huddled on the Murphy bed with every light on, unable to stop shaking. No red letter appeared, no thumping at the door. Apparently, seeing what was outside was punishment enough. The next day, desperate for human contact and terrified of being alone with my thoughts, I did something I knew was foolish. I reached out to Mark Chen, a web developer I'd worked with remotely on a few projects. We'd exchanged friendly emails, and he lived about 40 minutes south in Portland. I told him I was new to the area and struggling with the isolation, asked if he'd like to come by for coffee and maybe brainstorm some project ideas. He agreed immediately. We set a time for 7 p.m. that Friday. I told myself I was being careful. I would check his reflection in the hallway mirror, just like the rule demanded. I wouldn't forget. This would be fine. I just needed to see another human being, have a normal conversation, remember that the world outside this building still existed. Friday came. I cleaned the apartment obsessively, made coffee, arranged some cookies on a plate like a normal person having a normal visitor. Mark arrived at 7 on the dot. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him pause outside my door. "Eliza, it's Mark." I opened the door with a smile that felt foreign on my face. "Hi." "Come in. Thanks for making the drive." He stepped across the threshold, and that's when I realized, with a sick, dropping sensation in my stomach, that I'd never checked the hallway mirror. In my anxiety about having company, about appearing normal, I'd forgotten the one thing I was supposed to do. Mark looked exactly like his profile picture. Early 30s, dark hair, glasses, friendly smile. He wore jeans and a sweater, carried a laptop bag. Everything about him seemed perfectly normal as he followed me into the apartment, commenting on the view of the ocean through the window. But something was wrong. His movements were just slightly out of sync, as if he were moving through water or operating on a fractional delay. When he turned his head, his body followed a half-second later. When he reached for the coffee cup I offered, his hand arrived at it in stages: shoulder, elbow, wrist, fingers, like a badly animated character. "This is a nice place," he said, his voice perfectly normal. "How are you settling in?" "Fine," I managed, watching him with growing unease. "It's been an adjustment." We talked about work, about the projects we'd collaborated on. His words were normal, his responses appropriate. But he sat too still when he wasn't moving, his body rigid in the chair. And his eyes, they were Mark's eyes, the right color and shape, but they didn't quite track correctly. They moved a fraction too fast or lingered a fraction too long. The conversation became increasingly surreal. I found myself responding on autopilot while my mind screamed that this wasn't Mark. Or it was Mark, but something else was wearing him like an ill-fitting suit, piloting his body with imperfect understanding of how humans moved. At 11:42 p.m., he stood abruptly. "I should go," he said. There was no inflection, no regret or warmth, just a flat statement of fact. "Already?" I asked, though relief flooded through me. He walked to the door without responding, opened it, and stepped into the hallway. He didn't say goodbye, didn't turn to wave, just disappeared down the stairs with those strange, syncopated movements. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. What had I let into my apartment? What had I invited across my threshold by forgetting to check the mirror? The next morning, I found 3 red envelopes taped to my door. The first read, "You did not verify. You invited blindly. Careless." The second read, "What enters without permission does not always leave." The third, in smaller, more severe handwriting, read, "You invited what does not belong. It is still here." My hands trembled as I crumpled the letters. Still here? What did that mean? I found out quickly. The cup of water I'd placed by my door that morning evaporated within seconds of being set down, the liquid disappearing as if it had never existed. I refilled it 3 times, and each time, the same thing happened. By afternoon, I gave up, leaving the empty cup in place. Whispers started echoing from the vents. I couldn't make out words, just the suggestion of voices having urgent, angry conversations somewhere in the walls. They grew louder at night, multiple voices talking over each other, creating a dissonant chorus that made it impossible to sleep. And there was the presence. I felt it constantly now, an invisible, cold pressure in the corner of the room near the kitchenette. The air there was always several degrees colder, and when I looked at it from the corner of my eye, I sometimes saw the space shimmer and darken, as if something were standing there watching me, waiting. Whatever Mark had been, or whatever had come in wearing Mark's shape, it had left something behind, or it had never left at all. On the 3rd day of this escalating horror, I encountered Nadia in the hallway. I'd been heading to the bathroom at the end of the hall, the only other room on the 3rd floor besides our apartments, when I heard her door unlocking. She emerged, carrying a small bag of trash, moving with her characteristic bird-like quickness, and froze when she saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. She looked worse than the last time I'd seen her. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair unwashed, her clothes hanging loosely as if she'd lost weight. "You broke Rule 5, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "I can feel it. The building feels it." She glanced at my door, at the empty space where the red letters had been. "They're teaching you." "Teaching me what?" My voice cracked. "I don't understand any of this. What is this place? What enforces these rules?" Nadia looked down the hallway toward the stairs, as if checking for listeners. Then she made a decision. "Come to my apartment, quickly, before it notices." I followed her into 3B without hesitation. Her apartment was a mirror image of mine, but felt completely different. Every surface was covered with papers, notes, diagrams, what looked like attempts to map out patterns. The walls had small marks scratched into them, tallies of some kind. The Murphy bed was down and unmade, blankets tangled as if she never properly slept. She locked the door behind us, all 3 locks engaged with practiced speed, and turned to face me. "The rules are adaptive," she said without preamble. "They change based on your behavior, your weaknesses, your fears. They're didactic. Do you understand what that means?" "Educational," I said. "They're designed to teach obedience through fear." She moved to a small desk cluttered with papers and pulled out a tarnished locket. "This belonged to the man who lived in your apartment before you. His name was David Reeves. He was here for 3 months." She opened the locket, showing me a photo of a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He looked nothing like the kind of person who would vanish without explanation. "He couldn't learn the rules," Nadia continued, "or he wouldn't. He kept testing, kept pushing boundaries like you're doing, kept thinking there was a logical explanation he could discover." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "One morning, his apartment was empty. Clean. Like he'd never been there at all. But I heard him that last night. I heard him screaming. I felt cold dread settling into my chest. What is this place? A system? A mechanism? She gestured to her notes. I've been here 2 years. I've watched 7 tenants come and go. Some leave after a few weeks. They break a rule badly enough that they're driven out. Some stay and become compliant, like Mr. Keene. Have you noticed he's always here at night but never during the day? He's been the night caretaker for 30 years. He's part of it now. But what enforces the rules? What was that thing outside my window? What came in wearing Mark's face? I don't know. Her voice was flat, exhausted. I don't think it has a name or a form. It's the building itself, maybe, or something that lives in the building, in the walls, in the spaces between. All I know is that it watches, and it remembers, and it demands obedience. I thought of the presence in my apartment, the cold spot in the corner, the whispers in the vents. It's still there. In my apartment. What Mark brought in. It will be, Nadia said grimly, until you've learned whatever lesson it wants to teach you. Until you prove you understand the cost of carelessness. I looked at her notes, at the desperate attempts to map out some pattern or logic. Have you tried to leave? Every day. She laughed, a broken sound. But where would I go? How far could I get before it followed? This isn't just a building, Eliza, it's a trap, and we're caught in it. I left her apartment feeling more terrified than when I'd entered. Because Nadia had confirmed my worst fear, this wasn't a haunting I could wait out or a problem I could solve with logic. It was a system, arbitrary and cruel, and I was trapped inside it. I couldn't escape it. I could only learn to survive it, or be destroyed by it. The days following my conversation with Nadia were the worst yet. The invisible presence in my apartment grew stronger, more insistent. The cold spot in the corner expanded, claiming more of the room each day. The whispers from the vents became loud enough that I could almost make out words, urgent, angry syllables that made my skin crawl. I stopped sleeping in the Murphy bed, instead dozing fitfully in the bathroom with the door locked, the only space that felt even remotely protected. I performed the rules with obsessive precision. Water cup at exactly 9 p.m. Home by 9:30. Blinds sealed. But it wasn't enough. Whatever I'd invited in by forgetting to check Mark's reflection wasn't satisfied with compliance. It wanted something more, something I didn't know how to give. On the 5th day after my conversation with Nadia, I made my decision. I was leaving. I didn't care where I went or what happened. Anything was better than staying in this apartment, in this building, under the constant weight of that watching presence. I could go to Portland, to Boston, to Sarah's place. I could start over again, properly this time. I packed a go bag with essentials, clothes, laptop, phone charger, what little cash I had. It was 3 p.m, plenty of time before any curfew or forbidden hours. I could walk out the door right now, get in my car, and drive away from Willow Court forever. Leave the rules and the letters and the hollow-eyed thing at the window behind me. I picked up the bag, walked to my apartment door, and reached for the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, gripping harder, twisting with both hands. The knob moved slightly, but the door itself didn't budge, as if it were welded shut. I threw my shoulder against it, once, twice, putting all my weight behind it. Nothing. The door might as well have been solid concrete. Panic rising in my throat, I dropped the bag and ran to the window. The latch turned easily, but when I tried to lift the frame, it wouldn't move. I pulled until my arms shook, my fingers white on the wood. The window was sealed as thoroughly as the door, the glass feeling unnaturally solid when I pressed against it, more like steel than glass. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. No signal, not even emergency calls available. The screen showed full bars, but when I tried to dial, nothing happened. I opened the browser, no connection. Email. Failed to send. The phone was functionally useless, reduced to an expensive paperweight. The building had become my entire world, my prison, and I was locked inside it. I sank to the floor, my back against the unmoving door, and tried to think through the panic. Nadia had said the system demanded respect, that it was didactic, teaching obedience through fear. What if the lockdown was another lesson? What if the only way out was through complete, unquestioning submission? I remembered the red letters instructions after I'd been late. Write an apology, slip it under the mat, don't go to bed until it's done. I'd complied only when terrified. What if I complied now, voluntarily, as proof that I'd learned? I got to my feet, moving with mechanical determination. If submission was what it wanted, I would give it submission so complete, so absolute, that it would have to release me. The ritual of appeasement began. I filled a cup with tap water, not just any cup, but the cleanest one I had, filled precisely to the brim, and placed it against the doorframe with reverent care. I checked my blinds, found a roll of duct tape in a drawer, and sealed every gap and crack where light might enter during the forbidden hours. I wrapped tape around the edges until the window was completely covered, a silvery cocoon that ensured nothing could see in and I couldn't see out. Then I found a piece of red construction paper I'd bought weeks ago, thinking I might use it for a design project. I sat at the small table and began to write. Not a simple "I'm sorry" scribbled in panic, but a lengthy, carefully worded apology that took up both sides of the paper. I apologized for being late, for testing the blinds, for inviting Mark without checking the mirror, for every moment of doubt, every instant of rebellion, every thought of escape. I wrote until my hand cramped, my handwriting becoming smaller and more desperate as I filled every inch of the red paper with my contrition. When I finished, I placed it carefully on the floor in the center of the room, smoothed it flat, and stepped back. The apartment was silent, waiting. Then the temperature began to drop. It wasn't gradual like that first night, but sudden and brutal. One moment the air was normal, the next I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The cold sank into my bones, made my joints ache, turned my fingers numb. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering violently, but it did nothing. This cold came from somewhere beyond the physical, and no amount of warmth could fight it. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me like an invisible hand. Breathing became difficult, each inhale requiring conscious effort. The walls seemed to lean inward, the ceiling lowering, the space contracting around me. Claustrophobia clawed at my throat. And then I felt it. The presence. It had been in the corner before, contained and watching. Now it filled the entire apartment. It was in the walls, in the floor beneath my feet. In the air I struggled to breathe. It was everywhere and everything, and I was trapped inside it. There were no words, no voice. But I felt its intent as clearly as if it had spoken directly into my mind. A raw, oppressive communication that bypassed language entirely. It was examining me, weighing me, assessing the quality of my fear and the depth of my submission. Every thought I'd ever had in this apartment, every moment of rebellion or doubt, was laid bare before this intelligence. It knew me completely, saw through every layer of self-deception and pride. It was the letter writer, the system made manifest, and it was deciding whether I had learned my lesson. I fell to my knees on the cold floor, unable to stand under the weight of that presence. Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please, I understand now. I'll obey. I'll follow every rule. I'll never question again. Just please let me go." The pressure intensified. It wanted more. "I'm sorry," I said, louder now, the words tumbling out in a desperate stream. "I'm so sorry for everything. For testing you, for doubting, for thinking I could understand or escape. I was wrong. I was arrogant. This is your place. your domain, and I was a guest who disrespected the host. I understand that now. I accept it. The temperature dropped further. My words weren't enough. It wanted something deeper, something true. I closed my eyes, trying to find words for what I was feeling. Terror, yes, but beneath that, something else. A kind of sick